Hey guys, just getting set up here. And let me turn the light on and turn the other light on. And then we'll be ready to go. And let some other people come into the place. Let me do one other thing. Grab this. All right, so today, today's topic is going to be about intermittent fasting and low carb. So wanted to let a couple people join in, and the reason I chose this topic is because I did a book signing yesterday, actually. So shout out to them, and that was a big question about intermittent fasting and low carb. So I wanted to make sure that I addressed it again. Give me one more. I'm gonna turn this up. And so I wanted to make sure I addressed it here. So my name is Dr. Ramik Hunt, for those who don't know. I'm an internal medicine physician and an obesity medicine specialist. And I'm here today to talk to you about intermittent fasting and also about low carb diet and what the differences are. So let's first start with intermittent fasting. So we hear a lot about intermittent fasting. It's a very popular type of diet, a way to lose weight. And there are different ways to do intermittent fasting. You can do 5 and 2, meaning 5 days on, 5 days off, 2 days on, or however you say it. Or you can do daily fasting, where you fast for a certain part of the day, and then you eat for a shorter period of time. And so some people ask, well, when do you do that? Like, how long do you fast? And you hear people say 12 hours, you hear people say 16 hours. And the truth is, you could do either 12 or 16. I generally recommend people do 16. If you can't start with 16, then start with 12 and then gradually work your way up to 16. The way we recommend people do intermittent fasting is to, because if you're sleeping 8 hours, that's a part of your fast. So that if you stop eating, let's say at 6 p.m., and then you go to sleep and you don't eat until lunchtime, that's your 16 hours. You'll eat from 11 or 10 to 6 p.m. or 12 to 8. I generally like to tell people to do it earlier, because it seems that you get a better effect if you do that. So why or how does intermittent fasting work? Well, intermittent fasting works because when you're eating, your body secretes insulin. And I talk a lot about insulin. I talk a lot about other hormones like ghrelin and all these, and the satiating hormones. But when you're eating, you secrete insulin. And when you secrete insulin, that then makes you store fat. And when you secrete insulin, it also prevents you from releasing fat from your fat cells, particularly in your gut. And so the whole idea behind intermittent fasting is there are periods that you're not eating so you will allow for your insulin levels to drop, so that because once your insulin levels drop, then you can start to release energy from the fat cells. See, overnight we all fast because we're not eating while we're sleeping, hopefully. But when you wake up, you break fast. I mean, that's the whole concept of breaking your overnight fast. And so if you just extend that for a longer period of time, then you get to burn even more fat. So that's the whole concept behind intermittent fasting, keeping your insulin level down throughout the day. Now, there are books that have been written about this. The Obesity Code is a famous one. And if you read that book, one of the things that Jason Fung mentions, and it's something you should pay attention to, is that just because you're doing intermittent fasting and there's a period that you're not fasting, when you start eating, you still should not eat the wrong foods. And what I mean by the wrong foods is you still should not be eating a lot of carbohydrates, because the whole concept of intermittent fasting is to keep your insulin down. And what stimulates your insulin the most is carbohydrates, particularly sugar and refined carbohydrates. And so during the 8-hour period that you're eating, you still should be eating, healthy proteins, healthy fats, and a lot of fiber. So that's still very, very important during that time, because you will defeat the purpose if you don't do it like that. And so someone just asked, well, what's the best time to start? And I really do think that you should end your eating around 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., depending, of course, on what time you get off of work, or whatever makes sense. But it would be better to stop sooner rather than later for a lot of different reasons. And one is physiology, because in physiology, the later you eat, the higher you get these insulin spikes. And so if you could stop eating earlier, then you wouldn't get as many insulin spikes. And so to do intermittent fasting, you just, you eat your dinner, you have your water, and you can have water, you can have black coffee. So you would go to sleep whenever you normally go to sleep, and then you wouldn't eat again, like I said, for another 12 or 16 hours. And I recommend 16 hours if you can do it. And so sometimes people need to start a little slower. So that's why we tell people then start with 12 hours and then work your way up to 16. So that brings me to my next point. How is that different than a low carb diet? Well, the difference, there's a couple of things that are different between intermittent fasting and a low carb diet. One, a low carb diet, you don't have to fast intermittently throughout the day, or 2 days a week. You can eat your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you can even have a snack. But the concept is the same. The rationale is the same, in that the goal is to decrease your insulin. And so what stimulates insulin, and whenever we say stimulate insulin, the first thing that should come to your head is fat production. That's you. Insulin production is synonymous with fat production. So that's exactly what you should be thinking. So what stimulates insulin the most? Carbohydrates. Then protein somewhere a little less, and then fats doesn't stimulate insulin all that much at all. And so if you had a diet that was low in carbohydrates, and what I mean by carbohydrates is, sugars and refined carbohydrates, because actually fiber is good, and that is a carbohydrate, but that's good. So we would want you to reduce your carbohydrates so that, in effect, you will also reduce your insulin. And you will get a very similar effect as you would with intermittent fasting. So you could say, well, which one is better? Should I do intermittent fasting or should I do low carb? Well, it depends on the person. We, in my practice, we do primarily a low carb diet, and the reason is because there's been studies that show that it's difficult to maintain a intermittent fasting for a sustained period of time. And some would argue that, well, I've seen a study out there that said the same about a low carb diet, and they would be right. But the studies for a low carb diet, there are more studies that I've seen, and also in my clinic personally, that I know we know how to fashion it in such a way where you will be able to sustain it, because it's not like you're not eating. You're going to have a healthy protein, whether it's a fish, salmon, or something like that, and you're going to have a green veggie, and then you're going to have your snacks in the middle. And most people, if they stick to it or commit to it, can do it. And so that's the reason why we primarily go with a low carb diet in my practice. Well, which one is better? I haven't seen any really good head-to-head studies, but what I will tell you is that theoretically, if you were to do an intermittent fasting diet correctly, you would lower your insulin even more, right? Because if you eat low carb, that'll decrease your insulin. But if you eat no carb or no food at all, that would decrease your insulin even more. So theoretically, you could burn more fat. And so this is, but it also depends on what you're eating during the times that you're not fasting. So that's why it really, really just depends. And thank you for the book club. Hope Inc. I see you on there. We had a great discussion. That's why I'm having this discussion today, because of what we did yesterday. And so it really depends. And what I tell people, it's really a personal choice. Either way, your carbs should be low. And I really do feel that you can incorporate a low carb diet and sustain it for longer periods of time, just from my own personal experience in my clinic. Now, some people actually combine the two. So some people will get their carbs down. In the book No Guesswork, we talk about shooting for 75 grams, get your carbs down, and do intermittent fasting. You don't have to do both, but sometimes people, if they feel like their weight loss stalled a little bit, or they want to make a few changes and they want to just shake things up, they will do both. And that is perfectly fine. It's perfectly safe, and it is perfectly effective. And so we do allow people to do both. Both methods are very good and effective, and I recommend both of them. I primarily, however, recommend a low carb diet for reasons I just stated, that I think the sustainability is better with a low carb diet. But I was just speaking to somebody today. They're doing intermittent fasting, and they've been doing very, very well with it. So it really depends on you as a person, but know that both of those diets are very healthy diets, and they're probably some of the more healthier diets, because it keeps your insulin level low, and having a high insulin drives fat production, and then it drives so many other inflammatory and fat promoting things. And so it's a good idea to keep your carbohydrates down. But they are both effective. I utilize them both in my practice. I do think, like I said, a low carb diet is more sustainable, so we try to get people going with a low carb diet, and if they want to incorporate intermittent fasting at some point, that's okay. And because the other thing is that if they can't continue their intermittent fasting, they then need to go back to something else. And so I want to always make sure you have your low carb diet as your base. Someone wrote, is wheat better than white for watching carbs? And if so, why? So when we're talking about carbs, wheat is a little bit better than white. Brown is a little bit better than white, but it's not the best because, yeah, when you strip away the kernel and you get down just to the white part of it, that's the most refined. But to make it best, it should be completely unrefined. So it should be fiber. And if it's not fiber, then that means that it's been stripped or it's been refined. And if it's been refined, it can easily or more easily break down into sugar. So when you look at a package, and we should all look at labels. When you look at the label, it'll tell you how much fiber is in there under carbs, and it'll tell you how much of it is other types of carbohydrates. And so you need to count those carbohydrates like you would count any other carbohydrates unless it's fiber. And so we can go into at another discussion if how do you look at net carbs versus total carbs? But just know that we do total carbs for a variety of reasons so that it won't confuse people, because this is, again, about no guesswork. We don't want to confuse people. We just want to give you very straightforward and simple answers on how to do things. And so that's the reason we go with total carbs. And someone wrote, how to reset my diet after you do a cleanse. I think you do it the same way you would do anything, whichever one you think that you can do it with, whether it's a low carb diet or intermittent fasting. Get started with either one. But again, you even if you do intermittent fasting, you still need to keep your carbs at a reasonable level. And and if you stop intermittent fasting, you need to be able to fall back on something, and that fall back on should be a low carb diet, because that is, that's what's going to sustain you for the long run. And so I'll see if I'll answer a couple of more questions before I wrap. Okay, here we go. So someone asked again. I'll just reiterate it. What the times are for fasting, and so the times can be whatever time you pick. But I recommend, and I suggest, and most people suggest, that a part of the time that you're fasting, when you do intermittent fasting, it's while you're sleeping. So that way you're sleeping, you don't have to worry about it. And I suggest that you stop eating somewhere around 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. Definitely wouldn't go past 8 p.m. So I tell people they can do it. Eat dinner at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. I wouldn't eat much later than 8 p.m. because the later you eat, the more insulin goes up, because insulin, it can go up. So if you eat the same thing at noontime, let's say that you eat at the same thing at midnight, it will spike your insulin twice as much at midnight. And so the later you eat, the more you're spiking insulin. And as I mentioned to you, you got to think of insulin as something that is forming fat. And so it's important that you make sure that you try to do the best strategy that you can for your body, which is why we do it. We try to tell people to kind of wrap it up around 6, at the latest 7 p.m. and definitely no later than 8 p.m. At least that's what I would recommend. Again, there are many different ways you can do it, but that is the way I recommend. So to recap, intermittent fasting and low carb diet, they are very similar in the way that they help you lose weight, because they both help you reduce your insulin levels. You can do both. we recommend mostly a low carb diet because we know that that's sustainable, and we know that if you do intermittent fasting, you still need to keep your carbs low anyway. And if you were to stop intermittent fasting, you would want to be able to, fall back on a low carb diet so you won't regain the weight. So it's really important that you keep your eye on keeping your carbs down anyway. We recommend less than 100. You target of 75. You always need to find your number. Hashtag what's your carb number. It's always important to find your number. So thank you guys for showing up tonight. As always, we will be doing a special live tomorrow with the co-writer of the person who helped me with the book, No Guesswork. We're gonna have a special surprise for you for that. So stay tuned on that. And so we want you to make sure you check us out on social media. Tell your friends about the book. Tell your friends about the social media, No Guesswork. And also join the No Guesswork YouTube page. And you guys have a great night. See you later. Bye.